What if everything you thought you knew about the Bible was only part of the story? There exists a Bible, ancient, mysterious, and almost forgotten. Not the 66 books we find in today's standard editions, but 88 sacred texts, including lost gospels, hidden prophecies, and powerful revelations that were once embraced by early believers. So why don't we see them today? Because long ago, leaders of the early church gathered and chose which books would define Christian doctrine and which ones would be cast aside, not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. Dangerous not to the faith, but to control. These writings spoke of divine secrets, of angels who walked among us, of knowledge that connected heaven and earth in ways that defied tradition. Books like the Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and others texts that painted a far deeper, more mystical portrait of God and the universe were hidden, buried in deserts, locked in monasteries, forgotten by time, until now. Today, these ancient scrolls are resurfacing. Scholars, seekers, and believers around the world are beginning to ask, what truths were kept from us? What if the full story of creation, salvation, and eternity was never truly lost, just sealed away? This isn't about rewriting faith. It's about recovering the faith that was once fearless, the kind of faith that dared to explore the mysteries of God without fear or censorship. Open your eyes. The lost books are no longer lost, and once you read them, you may never see the Bible or your purpose the same way again. What if the Bible you've grown up reading wasn't the whole picture? Hidden deep within the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible are ancient texts that most of the Christian world has never seen, books that speak of a heavenly war, of angels who defied God, of giants known as the Nephilim who walked the earth, and of end-time prophecies so detailed, so intense, they were deemed too dangerous for public reading. These writings weren't lost. They were deliberately excluded. Unlike the Western Bible with its 66 books, the Ethiopian canon includes 81, and for centuries, it preserved texts that other branches of Christianity tried to forget. But why? Why would church leaders silence these scriptures? What was it about these books that made them so uncomfortable? The answer lies in what they reveal. Within these pages, we find a cosmic struggle unfolding between good and evil, not just on earth, but in the unseen realms. The Book of Enoch, for example, gives us a glimpse into the fall of the Watcher's angels who descended, took human wives, and gave birth to the Nephilim, corrupting creation itself. It tells of their judgment, the rise of wickedness, and how God planned to restore order. Other texts describe heavenly hierarchies, realms of angels and principalities, and how their influence shapes human destiny. They speak of the roles demons play in temptation, deception, and spiritual warfare. And they reveal visions of the end times that go far beyond what we see in Revelation, visions that feel uncannily relevant to the world we live in today. These books weren't excluded because they were false. They were excluded because they revealed too much. Today, you have a chance to see what was once hidden, to read the words that shook ancient faith to its core, to ask the questions most never dare to ask. What else has been kept from us? And why? This is just the beginning. Let's step into the forgotten books and uncover the truths they were never supposed to tell. Most Christians are familiar with the Bible containing 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament, and 27 in the New. But what if I told you there's another version of the Bible, one that includes not just a few more, but 22 additional sacred texts? The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible contains 88 books, and these aren't just minor additions. They're ancient writings filled with prophecy, wisdom, and spiritual insight books, like When Enoch, Jubilees, 2 Esdras, and the Book of the Shepherd of Hermas. These texts were once read aloud in early Christian communities, considered inspired, and treated as scripture. So why don't we find them in the Bibles we read today? Over centuries, as church councils met to define doctrine and preserve unity, some writings were deemed too mysterious, too controversial, too bold. These books spoke of fallen angels, heavenly visions, and end-time revelations that didn't fit the emerging theological frameworks. And so they were removed, hidden away, and labeled as non-canonical. But the Ethiopian Church, the oldest continuous Christian tradition in the world, never abandoned them. For over 1,600 years, they've preserved these texts, treating them as part of the sacred Word of God. Now, as scholars and believers around the world rediscover these lost writings, one question remains: what divine truths have we been missing all along? Some of these books were part of early Jewish and Christian tradition, used by communities for centuries. They contain prophecies, cosmic visions, and stories of the ancient world that you won't find anywhere else. But these were books that early church councils, particularly after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, deemed too controversial, too mystical, or too closely tied to Jewish traditions. But Ethiopia's connection to the Bible goes much further back than you might think. Before European colonization, long before Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, the ancient kingdom of Ethiopia had already developed a spiritual tradition linked directly to the Bible. The roots of Ethiopian Christianity stretch all the way back to the 4th century AD, when the kingdom of Aksum officially adopted Christianity as its state religion. In fact, Ethiopia became one of the first nations in the world to adopt Christianity, centuries before many Western nations, and from that time, the Bible, written in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian language, became central to Ethiopian religious life. But Ethiopia's connection to biblical history likely goes even further, beyond Christianity itself. According to ancient Ethiopian tradition, this connection begins with the Queen of Sheba, who traveled from Ethiopia to visit King Solomon in Jerusalem around the 10th century BC. This visit is mentioned briefly in the Western Bible, but Ethiopian tradition expands on the story. The Ethiopian Bible goes so far as to tell us that the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon had a child, Menelik the Fin, who would become the first emperor of Ethiopia. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Menelik is said to have brought the Ark of the Covenant, yes, the Ark that held the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, back to Ethiopia. For Ethiopians, this wasn't just a historical event. It was a divine mission. Ethiopia, according to their tradition, was chosen by God to be the protector of the Ark of the Covenant, directly linking Ethiopia's spiritual destiny to Israel's sacred history. So, with such a profound connection to biblical law, it's no surprise that Ethiopia became a spiritual stronghold, a nation that not only embraced Christianity early, but also became the guardian of ancient texts that other Christian traditions eventually rejected. As Ethiopia stood apart from Western European influence, it preserved these sacred books in its Orthodox Bible. These texts remained a part of Ethiopian religious life for centuries, even as they were slowly pushed out of the Western Christian canon. But that brings us to the question: why were these books excluded from the Standard Bible? The reasons are as complex as they are fascinating. Some of these books were banned because they contain ideas that were seen as too mystical or too speculative. Books like the Book of Enoch describe celestial beings, fallen angels, and the Nephilim, mysterious giant beings that were the offspring of humans and angels. These apocalyptic visions delve into the secrets of heaven and hell, the origins of sin, and God's final judgment, which was seen as too dangerous for the early church to endorse. Others were banned because they stayed too close to Judaism. Books like Jubilees and Maccabees emphasize the strict observance of Jewish laws, such as the Sabbath, dietary practices, and circumcision. At a time when the early Christian church was trying to distinguish itself from Judaism, these texts were seen as a threat to the new identity that Christianity was building. Finally, some of these books were seen as a threat to orthodoxy, to the unified doctrine that the early church was trying to establish. The church leaders feared that including these books might lead to diverse interpretations of theology, particularly regarding the role of angels, the afterlife, and God's divine judgment. Allowing these books to remain in the canon could have opened the door to heresy or division within the early church. But there's more. During the colonial era, when European powers, particularly Italy, sought to dominate Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible itself became a target. It was viewed as a spiritual threat to European control. The Bible's unique content, which tied Ethiopia spiritually to Israel and early Christianity, symbolized resistance to European religious and cultural dominance. By marginalizing Ethiopia's Orthodox Bible, colonial forces sought to suppress Ethiopian religious independence and enforce Western religious views. This is Deep Bible Stories. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with anyone who's ready to dive deep into the Bible's hidden secrets. To understand why the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible includes so many books that were excluded from the standard Christian Bible, we first need to explore Ethiopia's unique place in biblical and Christian history. Let's begin in the 4th century AD, a time when much of the world had yet to fully embrace Christianity. In the midst of this, the kingdom of Aksum, a powerful civilization located in what is now modern-day Ethiopia, became one of the first nations in the world to officially adopt Christianity as its state religion. This moment solidified Ethiopia's identity as a Christian nation and made it one of the oldest continuously Christian countries on earth. But how did this come to be? According to ancient Ethiopian history, the spread of Christianity into Ethiopia was not a result of European missionaries, as many might assume. Instead, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its roots back to the Apostle Philip and the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch, as recorded in Acts 8:26-40. This Ethiopian court official, baptized by Philip, brought the Christian faith back to Ethiopia, marking the beginning of the Ethiopian Christian tradition. Within a few centuries, this small movement became the state religion of the powerful kingdom of Aksum. It was through the Coptic Church of Alexandria that Christianity formally took root in Ethiopia, leading to the translation of the Bible into Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian language. And as Christianity spread throughout the Aksumite kingdom, it wasn't just the 66 books that were included in their Bible. Ethiopia's unique history meant that it had access to a wide range of Jewish and early Christian texts. This early adoption of Christianity also helped Ethiopia maintain its spiritual independence from the rest of the Christian world. As the Roman Empire and the Western Church worked to solidify a single biblical canon, Ethiopia remained on the periphery of these debates, free to preserve its ancient traditions and texts. As a result, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible contains not only the familiar books of the Old and New Testaments, but also additional texts that offer profound insights into early Jewish and Christian theology. But Ethiopia's connection to biblical history goes even deeper than the early spread of Christianity. To understand the full picture, we have to go back much further, 1,000 years before Christ. In fact, according to Ethiopian tradition, the roots of Ethiopia's biblical connection begin with a remarkable woman, the Queen of Sheba. This powerful queen is mentioned briefly in the Western Bible in 1 Kings 10:1-13 and 2 Chronicles 9. According to these accounts, she traveled from the distant land of Sheba, believed by Ethiopians to be modern-day Ethiopia and Yemen, to meet the great King Solomon in Jerusalem. But while the Western Bible gives us only a glimpse of her visit, the Ethiopian Bible tells a much richer story. According to the Kebra Nagast, an ancient Ethiopian text that forms a cornerstone of Ethiopia's national and spiritual identity, the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopia as Makeda, and King Solomon had a child together, Menelik, who would go on to become the first emperor of Ethiopia. What makes this story even more extraordinary is the claim that when Menelik grew older, he visited his father, Solomon, in Jerusalem. Upon his return to Ethiopia, he's said to have brought with him one of the most important artifacts in all of biblical history, the Ark of the Covenant. That's right. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that held the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, has been kept in Ethiopia for centuries. This deep and enduring connection to Israel's sacred history has shaped Ethiopian Christianity in profound ways. For Ethiopians, the Ark of the Covenant represents a divine mission that links Ethiopia directly to God's chosen people, Israel. Ethiopia sees itself not as a peripheral nation, but as a central player in God's plan for the world, a nation that was chosen to protect the Ark and preserve the ancient truths of the Bible. While Western Christianity was busy shaping and narrowing the biblical canon, Ethiopia was safeguarding the full breadth of early Christian and Jewish texts. And because of Ethiopia's relative isolation from Europe, it was able to resist the pressures to conform to the Council of Nicaea's decisions regarding the canon. The Council of Nicaea, held in 325 AD, was a pivotal moment for Christianity in the Roman Empire. It was here that church leaders came together to solidify Christian doctrine and eventually to decide which books would be considered inspired and which would be left out. The Western Church began to shape a Bible that was stripped of texts deemed too Jewish, too mystical, or too speculative. Books like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Maccabees were seen as problematic for various reasons, whether they delved too deeply into the nature of angels or emphasized strict Jewish observances. But Ethiopia was largely unaffected by these decisions. It remained connected to its Coptic Christian roots, which allowed it to hold on to a much wider range of biblical texts. This is why the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible includes not only the 66 books found in the Christian Standard Bible, but also 22 additional books that were eventually banned or excluded from the Western canon. Ethiopia became a spiritual stronghold, a place where ancient traditions could be preserved without the influence of Western European doctrines. This is why the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible stands apart from the Bibles used by most of the Christian world today. It is a living testament to a Christian tradition that has remained rooted in the early days of the faith, untouched by many of the theological debates and political struggles that shaped the Western Bible. The fact that the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible still includes these banned and excluded texts is not just an interesting historical quirk. It's a reminder that there were once many different interpretations of what should be included in the Bible, and that many of the texts that were discarded by the Western Church still have profound spiritual significance. For instance, the Book of Enoch offers a vivid description of fallen angels, their interactions with humanity, and their eventual judgment. It is a text that influenced early Christian thought about the nature of evil and the end times. Meanwhile, the Book of Jubilees provides a Jewish perspective on biblical history that includes new insights into the lives of the patriarchs and the importance of angelic beings in guiding humanity. These texts offer us a glimpse into a lost part of Christian history, a time when theology was still being formed and the boundaries of orthodoxy were still being debated. For Ethiopia, these books were never banned. They have always been a part of its religious life and have been treated with the same reverence as the more familiar texts of the Old and New Testaments. So, why exactly were these books banned? What was it about these sacred texts that led the Western Church to declare them unfit for the Bible? The reasons are as complex as they are fascinating, involving not just theological concerns, but also political and cultural struggles. In this section, we'll dive deep into the real reasons why these books were pushed aside by the early Christian leaders and why Ethiopia chose to keep them. One of the first reasons these books were excluded has to do with their mystical content, the deeply spiritual and often speculative nature of their teachings. Many of the banned texts, like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, explore themes that can be considered esoteric, focusing heavily on the celestial realm, the hierarchy of angels, and the interactions between heavenly beings and humanity. For instance, in the Book of Enoch, we find a vivid account of the Watchers, a group of fallen angels who descended to earth, interacted with humans, and ultimately led to widespread corruption through their offspring, the Nephilim. These angels not only rebelled against God, but they also imparted forbidden knowledge to humans, such as the secrets of warfare, magic, and astrology. This type of narrative is far removed from the more straightforward message of salvation that dominates the Western Bible. The Western Church, particularly after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, viewed these speculative teachings with suspicion. They were seen as distractions from the core tenets of the Christian faith, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Early Christian leaders feared that focusing too much on angels, cosmic battles, and the apocalypse would confuse believers or lead them into mystical interpretations of Scripture, diverting attention away from the message of salvation. This emphasis on speculative theology led the Western Church to exclude books like the Book of Enoch, which was once widely read by early Christian communities, particularly among the Essenes, a Jewish sect that many scholars believe influenced early Christian thought. While books like Enoch offer detailed insights into the spiritual realms and the fall of angels, the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches eventually decided that these books offered too much speculation on the unseen world. In contrast, Ethiopia viewed these texts not as distractions, but as integral parts of understanding the spiritual battle between good and evil. Ethiopian Christianity embraced the mystical elements of these texts, understanding that they shed light on the heavenly realm and the mysterious workings of God's creation. Another significant reason many of these books were banned is because of their close ties to Jewish traditions. Books like the Book of Jubilees and the Maccabees emphasize strict adherence to Jewish laws such as the Sabbath, circumcision, and dietary practices. These books were written in a time when Judaism was not yet fully separated from what would become Christianity, and they reflect a worldview that places great importance on following the Mosaic Law. For example, the Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, presents a retelling of biblical history from creation to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. But it goes further than the familiar stories found in Genesis and Exodus. Jubilees insists on the importance of Jewish festivals, the Sabbath, and ritual purity in ways that make it clear that these laws are to be followed eternally. It also introduces a solar calendar, a 364-day year, that it claims was the original system God set for the Jewish people, in contrast to the lunar calendar adopted later. As early Christianity developed, it sought to distance itself from Judaism. The early Christian movement wanted to open itself up to Gentiles, and this meant moving away from strict observance of Jewish customs and laws. The Apostle Paul himself argued for the freedom from the law, preaching that salvation came through faith in Christ rather than through adherence to the Mosaic Law. As the Western Church took shape, books that emphasized Jewish laws, like Jubilees and Maccabees, were seen as unnecessary relics of the past. Ethiopia, however, retained a much closer connection to Judaism. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its lineage back to King Solomon through Menelik Thur, the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Because of this, Ethiopia's Christian tradition has always been deeply rooted in Jewish practices, and it sees no need to distance itself from them. As a result, these texts remained part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, providing Ethiopians with a rich tradition that embraces both Old Testament law and Christian salvation. In fact, the Maccabees are particularly revered in Ethiopia. While Western Christianity largely relegated these texts to the apocryphal section, Ethiopia continued to use them as important reminders of Jewish resistance to faithfulness to God's law and divine intervention in the face of persecution. The Maccabees were celebrated as heroes who defended the Jewish faith from being wiped out by foreign rulers, and their story remains deeply inspirational to Ethiopian Christians today. Another major reason these books were banned is that they were seen as a threat to Christian orthodoxy. The early church was in a period of transitions and consolidation, and it was vital to establish a unified doctrine that could hold the faith together. As Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, different sects and interpretations began to arise, some of which were seen as heretical by the emerging Orthodox Church. Many of the books included in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible present alternative theological views that the Western Church feared could confuse or divide the early Christian communities. For example, some of these texts offer different interpretations of the afterlife, divine judgment, and the role of angels. The Book of Enoch, for example, goes into great detail about the Watchers, the fallen angels, and the Nephilim, concepts that were seen as too speculative for the emerging Christian doctrine. The early church leaders wanted to ensure that the focus remained on Christ's message of salvation, not on what they saw as cosmic speculation about angels and heavenly realms. The goal was to create a unified faith that would be consistent across all Christian communities, and that meant excluding texts that offered alternative narratives or placed too much emphasis on the unseen spiritual world. This is why the Council of Nicaea and later church councils were so important. They helped solidify a Christian canon that was intended to guide believers toward a clear understanding of Christ's role in salvation history. But in doing so, they excluded books that explored the spiritual mysteries of the universe, focusing instead on the more immediate teachings of the gospel. Ethiopia, however, did not see these books as a threat to orthodoxy. In fact, the Ethiopian Church believed that these texts deepened the understanding of God's cosmic plan, revealing insights into the angelic realm, the judgment of fallen angels, and the end times. For Ethiopia, these books were never meant to be speculative distractions, but were seen as complementary to the teachings of the New Testament, offering a fuller picture of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. Lastly, we can't overlook the role that colonialism played in marginalizing the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible during the colonial era, particularly during Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church and its sacred texts were seen as barriers to European dominance. For European colonial powers, Ethiopia's spiritual independence and its connection to ancient Christian traditions represented a form of resistance. Ethiopia was not a passive colony, waiting to be civilized by European missionaries. It was a Christian nation with its own unique and ancient traditions that predated much of Europe's Christian history. The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible was seen as a symbol of defiance as it tied Ethiopia directly to Israel and to the early Christian Church, a connection that was spiritually powerful and politically inconvenient for European colonizers. By marginalizing or banning the Ethiopian Bible, colonial forces sought to weaken Ethiopia's spiritual identity and enforce Western religious views. In the same way that Ethiopia's physical resistance to colonial rule made it a symbol of African independence, its religious resistance through the preservation of its Orthodox Bible made it a spiritual stronghold. Ethiopia's unique Bible, filled with banned books and extra texts, was seen as a threat to the Western religious order, one that challenged the dominance of Catholicism and Protestantism. Do you think colonial forces were threatened by the spiritual independence of Ethiopia? Share your thoughts on how this played a role in the suppression of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. Now that we've explored why these books were banned, it's time to dive into the secrets these books hold. Each of the texts within the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible offers profound revelations about spiritual realms, ancient history, and God's divine plan. Let's take a deeper look at these banned books and what they reveal about the unseen world, prophecies, and even the end of days. You'll see why Ethiopia preserved them and why they're more important now than ever. Perhaps the most famous of the banned books, the Book of Enoch, takes us deep into the cosmic order and the heavenly realms. But this is not a simple vision of angels and demons. This book gives us a detailed look at the rebellion of angels, their interactions with humans, and their eventual judgment. The Book of Enoch begins not with gentle wisdom, but with a rebellion in heaven. In its first section, known as the Book of Watchers, we're told of 200 angels, called the Watchers, who were sent by God to watch over humanity. But instead of protecting mankind, they fell from grace. Why? Because they became captivated by the beauty of human women. Led by a powerful angel named Semyaza, these watchers made a pact on Mount Hermon, swearing to abandon their divine posts and descend to earth. There, they took human wives, and from these unions were born the Nephilim, giants of immense strength and corruption, who brought violence and chaos to the world. But the damage didn't stop there. The Watchers also taught humanity forbidden knowledge, how to make weapons, practice sorcery, manipulate nature, and even control the stars. knowledge that humanity wasn't ready for, knowledge that led to rapid moral decay. God saw what had happened, and judgment came swiftly. The Nephilim were destroyed. The Watchers were bound in chains and cast into the depths, awaiting final judgment at the end of days. This is not a story you'll find in most Bibles, but it was once widely known and revered in early Jewish and Christian communities. So the question is, why was it removed? And what does it reveal about the unseen battle between heaven and earth? The story takes a darker turn when we learn what these fallen angels truly did. Led by Semjaza, the 200 Watchers descended from heaven, not just to observe, but to indulge in earthly desires. They took human wives, violating the boundaries God had set between the divine and mortal realms. From these unnatural unions came the Nephilim giants of immense size and strength, described in ancient texts as violent, bloodthirsty, and corrupt. They ravaged the earth, spreading destruction and chaos wherever they went. But the rebellion didn't stop at lust and violence. These angels brought with them forbidden knowledge, secrets never meant for human hands. They taught men how to forge weapons of war, how to manipulate nature, how to use magic and sorcery. They revealed the movements of the stars, the secrets of herbs and enchantments, the art of seduction and deception. This knowledge, once divine, became twisted in human hands, and the world fell deeper into corruption. It's a chilling tale, not just of angels falling, but of humanity being dragged down with them. And perhaps that's why this story was buried, locked away in the book of Enoch, and excluded from the Bibles most of us know today. Because it doesn't just challenge what we believe about angels and demons, it forces us to rethink the origin of evil and the hidden forces that have shaped our world from the very beginning. They taught humans the secrets of warfare, sorcery, cosmetics, and astrology, all seen as corruptions of God's natural order. This knowledge passed down by the fallen angels caused chaos on earth, and the Nephilim, the violent offspring of angels and humans, contributed to the moral decay of the world. Their violence and wickedness were so great that God decided to send the great flood to cleanse the earth of their influence. But before the flood, God sent the archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel to intervene. Their task, to capture the rebellious Watchers and bind them in the abyss, where they would remain until the day of judgment. These Watchers, along with their offspring, were seen as so corrupt that God wiped them from the face of the earth. But their legacy continues to haunt humanity. Would you like us to do an entire video diving deeper into the book of Enoch and the rebellion of the angels? Let us know in the comments. In another section of Enoch, known as the Book of Parables, we get a glimpse into the apocalyptic visions of Enoch, where he foretells the coming of a messianic figure called the Son of Man. This figure is portrayed as a divine judge who will execute judgment over both humans and angels. What's fascinating is how closely this Son of Man resembles Jesus Christ, who is referred to by the same title in the New Testament. Enoch's vision speaks of a final judgment where the wicked, including the fallen angels, are cast into a fiery abyss while the righteous inherit eternal life. This section of Enoch paints a vivid picture of the cosmic battle between good and evil, where the angels, demons, and humans all face their final judgment before the throne of God. One of the lesser-known sections of Enoch, the astronomical book, reveals the secrets of the cosmos. Enoch is shown the divine order of the stars, planets, and seasons, describing a solar calendar that is meant to keep humanity in alignment with the divine rhythm of creation. This section describes the movements of the heavenly bodies, which are controlled by angelic forces. The sun, moons, and stars don't just move at random. They follow a precise pattern, established by God and enforced by His angels. The book even warns that humans must follow the solar calendar rather than the lunar one to remain in sync with God's creation. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still follows this solar calendar today, a testament to its ancient roots in Enoch's revelations. Next, we turn to the Book of Jubilees. This is no ordinary history book. It's an in-depth retelling of biblical events from creation to the giving of the law at Sinai. But with a focus on the spiritual timeline of God's universe and the eternal importance of the law. At the heart of Jubilees is the concept that time itself is governed by an angelic calendar. God reveals to Moses on Mount Sinai that the true measure of time is not based on the lunar calendar, which was later adopted by the Israelites, but on a solar cycle. This is a 364-day year, divided into periods of jubilees, cycles of 49 years. The book emphasizes that adhering to this calendar is crucial to maintaining the order that God created. Why does this matter? According to Jubilees, the misalignment of time, using a lunar calendar instead of a solar one, leads humanity to fall out of sync with God's divine plan. The Ethiopian calendar, used to this day by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, follows this solar cycle, reflecting the belief that correct timekeeping is essential for remaining in alignment with the divine order. Could it be that we've been using the wrong calendar for centuries? Is the world out of sync with God's original plan? In addition to revealing the cosmic timeline, Jubilees tells us that angels were deeply involved in guiding the patriarchs long before Moses. Angels taught Adam, Noah, and Abraham how to observe the Sabbath, offer sacrifices, and follow purity laws. These laws weren't just for the Israelites. They were part of God's eternal law that had been revealed to the righteous from the very beginning. This close involvement of angels emphasizes that God's law is timeless. It predates the Mosaic covenant and remains unchanged. Even before Mount Sinai, God's law was known and followed by those who were in communion with Him, guided by the angels of His presence. The books of Maccabees are stories of heroic resistance and divine intervention. These texts tell the story of the Jewish revolt against foreign rulers, first in Judea under the Seleucids and later in Egypt under the Ptolemaic dynasty. What's fascinating is that in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, we have not just 2, but 3 books of Maccabees, each offering a unique perspective on faith under persecution. The first book of Maccabees recounts the Maccabean revolt, one of the most famous episodes in Jewish history. In 167 BC, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes attempted to force the Jews to abandon their religion and adopt Hellenistic customs. In response, Judas Maccabeus led a guerrilla war against the Seleucid Empire, miraculously reclaiming the temple in Jerusalem and restoring Jewish worship. This victory is still celebrated today in the festival of Hanukkah, which commemorates the miraculous burning of oil for 8 days during the rededication of the temple. The second book of Maccabees shifts focus to the martyrs, those who gave their lives rather than abandon their faith in God. The most heart-wrenching story is that of the 7 brothers and their mother, who were tortured for refusing to eat pork in defiance of Jewish law. One by one, they faced horrific deaths, but each brother proclaimed their faith in the resurrection, knowing they would be rewarded in eternity. This book also tells of visions of angels and divine intervention in the Maccabees' battles, reinforcing the belief that their victories were due to God's intervention. The third book of Maccabees takes us to Egypt, where the Jewish people faced persecution under Ptolemy IV. The most dramatic moment comes when Ptolemy orders the Jews to be trampled by drunken elephants. But in a miraculous turn of events, the elephants turn against the Egyptians, saving the Jewish people from certain death. The Ascension of Isaiah is one of the most mystical and apocalyptic books in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. It tells the story of the prophet Isaiah's visionary journey through the seven heavens, where he witnesses the cosmic battle between good and evil, and receives a prophecy about the Messiah's descent to earth. Isaiah is taken by an angel through each of the seven heavens, where he encounters various ranks of angels, the fallen ones, and finally reaches the seventh heaven, where he beholds the throne of God. The description of the seraphim, cherubim, and other celestial beings offers one of the most detailed accounts of the heavenly hierarchy in early Christian literature. But the climax of Isaiah's vision is the descent of the Messiah. Isaiah sees the Son of God descend from the seventh heaven, taking on human form, living a humble life, and ultimately suffering death at the hands of Satan's forces. But the vision doesn't end there. Isaiah witnesses the Messiah's victory over Satan, his resurrection, and his return to heaven, where he is exalted as the ruler of all. Finally, we turn to the book of Baruch and the letter of Jeremiah. These two texts were written during the Babylonian exile, offering powerful reflections on sin, repentance, and the consequences of idolatry. In Baruch, we find a lament over the destruction of Jerusalem, coupled with a heartfelt confession of sins. The text emphasizes that the exile was not just a political disaster, it was the result of Israel's disobedience to God. But Baruch also offers a message of hope. If the people repent and return to God, they will be restored. The letter of Jeremiah delivers a stark warning against idolatry. Jeremiah mocks the pagan gods of Babylon, pointing out their powerlessness and lifelessness. He urges the exiles to remain faithful to the one true God, who alone can deliver them from their suffering. As we've explored the incredible depth of the books included in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, one thing becomes clear. These texts hold far more than just ancient stories. They contain prophecies, spiritual insights, and warnings that resonate not only with the early Christian and Jewish communities, but with us today. In fact, many of the themes found in these books speak directly to the modern world, and may even hold the keys to understanding future prophetic events. One of the most striking features of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible is its detailed exploration of the angelic realm and the ongoing spiritual battle between good and evil. Books like the Book of Enoch, the Ascension of Isaiah, and Jubilees all offer vivid descriptions of angelic hierarchies, fallen angels, and their influence on the world. But why does this matter today? In many ways, the battle between good and evil has not ended. The idea of spiritual warfare, angels and demons influencing human events, is still a central theme in Christian theology. While these banned books may seem otherworldly or too speculative for some, they shed light on the hidden forces that are still at play in our world today. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Could it be that the book of Enoch's description of the Watchers, their rebellion, and the corruption they spread among humanity still has modern relevance? Could these texts provide us with a deeper understanding of the spiritual battle that is happening all around us, even now. Several of the banned books in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible contain prophecies about the end times, and these prophecies seem to offer clues that align with both biblical eschatology and current events. In the book of Enoch, we see detailed visions of the coming judgment, where both humans and fallen angels will face their final reckoning. The description of the Son of Man, executing divine judgment over the wicked, paints a clear picture of the messianic role that Jesus would later fulfill in the New Testament. But Enoch's prophecies don't stop there. They include detailed visions of the final battle between good and evil, the destruction of evil forces, and the ultimate restoration of righteousness on earth. Similarly, the ascension of Isaiah gives us a dramatic vision of the Messiah's journey from the heavenly realms to earth, where he battles Satan and eventually triumphs over him. These visions speak of a cosmic conflict that is not bound by time, but is still unfolding as we speak. In today's world, where we are witnessing unprecedented global conflicts, natural disasters, and spiritual unrest, many are asking, are we living in the end times? Could the prophecies found in these banned books be pointing us toward the final events of human history? Many scholars believe, though, that we are living in an age where biblical prophecy is being fulfilled, and the books we've explored may offer additional insight into what's to come. If we look closely at current events, wars, earthquakes, plagues, many of them align with the descriptions found in Enoch's visions of the end times. Another critical theme in these canon books, especially in the Book of Jubilees, is the importance of faithfulness to God's law. While the Western Church moved away from the Jewish laws that were so central to early Christianity, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintained its close ties to these ancient traditions. The laws of the Sabbath, dietary practices, and even the solar calendar that are outlined in Jubilees reflect a deep commitment to keeping God's commands in their purest form. For modern believers, these texts raise important questions. Are we living in alignment with God's laws? Have we strayed too far from the foundational principles that were given to humanity from the beginning? And what would it mean to return to these practices? Jubilees insists that the laws given to Adam, Noah, and Abraham were not temporary, but were meant to be observed forever. This raises the provocative question, should Christians today be following the same commandments that were given to the patriarchs? Has modern Christianity lost something by moving away from the strict observance of God's law? Finally, let's talk about what it means that these books have been preserved in Ethiopia. As we've seen, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible is a spiritual treasure that holds many of the texts that were excluded by Western Christianity. But Ethiopia's role in preserving these texts goes far beyond religious tradition. It represents a profound act of spiritual defiance against the forces that sought to erase these ancient truths. During the colonial period, as European powers attempted to impose their religious and political dominance over Africa, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church became a symbol of resistance. The preservation of these sacred texts was not just an act of religious devotion, it was a declaration of independence. Ethiopia held on to the ancient truths of the Bible, even as the rest of the Christian world abandoned them. What if some of the answers we've been searching for have been hidden in plain sight for centuries? The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, one of the oldest and most complete biblical canons in existence, contains sacred texts that most of the world has never read. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're powerful, prophetic writings that speak to the human condition, the spiritual realm, and the future of mankind. And maybe, just maybe, they were preserved for such a time as this. As the world faces growing instability, wars, confusion, moral collapse, and spiritual fatigue, these ancient books begin to sound less like relics of the past and more like messages meant for today. The visions of Enoch reveal heavenly realms and battles beyond our sight. The prophecies of Isaiah, in fuller form, cry out with warnings and hope. The bravery of the Maccabees reminds us that faith can endure under the most brutal oppression. Why were these books excluded from the Western Bible? Was it oversight or intentional suppression? The deeper we dig, the more we begin to see that these texts hold wisdom, warnings, and mysteries that may have been too bold for their time, but perfect for ours. Perhaps now, as the world teeters on the edge of something new, the time has finally come for these hidden voices to be heard again. What if the future has already been written, not in the pages we've always read, but in the ones we were never allowed to? The hidden books of the Ethiopian Bible are more than just ancient history. They are filled with prophecies, divine warnings, and spiritual truths that seem to speak directly to the world we live in today. These texts challenge traditional narratives, not to destroy faith, but to deepen it. Take 2 Esdras. For example, it describes global unrest, moral confusion, and a coming judgment so precise, it feels like it was written for this very generation. Or the Book of Enoch, which reveals how unseen spiritual forces have been influencing humanity for millennia, and how they will play a role in the final days. These writings weren't lost by accident. They were removed, suppressed, because they contain visions and truths that go beyond the comfortable boundaries of religion. But now, as the world faces crises unlike any before, technological, moral, and spiritual, the questions they raise feel more urgent than ever. Maybe these books were hidden until we were ready. Maybe the keys to understanding tomorrow have been waiting in silence until now. As we look around at the world today, wars, natural disasters, division, and a growing sense of spiritual confusion, it's hard not to ask, have we been missing something? What if the chaos we're witnessing isn't just political or environmental, but deeply spiritual? What if ancient books, once part of the biblical tradition, but later banned, hold answers to the very battles unfolding around us? These forgotten texts, preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, speak of unseen realms, angelic wars, and divine purposes that stretch far beyond our understanding. They offer vivid insight into spiritual warfare, the rise of evil, and even prophecies about the end of days, not vague or symbolic, but specific, challenging, and deeply relevant to the times we live in. Maybe they were hidden not to be silenced forever, but to be revealed when the world was finally ready to hear them. As we stand on the edge of something unknown, these ancient words might hold the wisdom we need not to escape the storm, but to understand it, and to stand firm in the truth of God's greater plan. Thank you for joining us on this journey through deep Bible stories. If this exploration has opened your eyes to new possibilities, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this message with others, because now, more than ever, the truth must be heard.